striking feature of our modern age has been man's dramatic search for the things of the past. Lost civilizations have a fascination for most of us, and it's an exciting experience to witness the uncovering of buried cities that existed so many thousands of years ago. As you know, much of the knowledge of early man was unknown to us until recent times, and what we now know we owe mostly to the great science of archaeology. The discoveries that have been unearthed have often completely surprised the world's scholars, and they have been compelled to revise their ideas concerning the early history of man. We take you tonight into the remote areas of the Middle East where the earliest civilizations of man have been unearthed. As we travel up the Persian Gulf, we come to a place called Basra, the home of Sinbad the Sailor, and this is the land of Iraq, originally called Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. And here for millenniums of time the two ancient rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, have flowed, and beside them were cradled the beginnings of civilization. Throughout this area we find hundreds of mounds that so far have not yet been excavated, but under them are cities, hundreds and hundreds of them, indicating that once in this area there was a great population. Now, 120 miles north of Basra is a place called Junction, and just over the way there are several mounds. Back in 1854, the French consul from Basra, curious, began to poke around these mounds, and he found some interesting tablets. He sent them to the British Museum, who deciphered them and found that this was Ur of the Chaldees, the hometown of Abraham, mentioned way back in the early chapters of Genesis. This, of course, was quite a surprise because it was considered that Abraham was only a legend, that if he did exist, he was only a Stone Age man. So they sent Sir Leonard Woolley with a team of excavators to open up these mounds, and one of the most fascinating chapters of archaeology began. The main landmark of Ur of the Chaldees was the ziggurat or temple tower, the central place of their worship. And they discovered that they worshipped the moon. They revered the moon as the great lady or mother. The top of the ziggurat, of course, today has disappeared. Originally it contained 4 great stories, and on the top the high priest would ascend to offer sacrifices to the moon. They practiced fertility worship here, which has come right down to our day. And 100 steps led to each platform. Today there's still 100, I think it is, left. 4,000 years old, still as firm as when they were built. And when one walks up this great stairway, it's a tremendous thrill. The stones in the stairway and in the building itself are cemented by black material. It is bitumen, which they used for cement. Originally the tower was covered with blue glazed brick, and it must have been beautiful. You can now see this brick in the British Museum. The experts reckon the building was a masterpiece, and they aimed at optical illusion, which we thought, of course, came from the Greeks. But the facts are that the Greeks undoubtedly borrowed this idea from the Sumerians. When they excavated the rest of the area, they found it was once a rich agricultural place. The Euphrates flowed beside it. They found piers and docks, and the evidence that it was once a large international port with thriving industries. The population was from 250,000 to 500,000 people, and some of the occupations were metallurgy, textile manufacture, musical instruments, and carpets, mind you. Here was evidence of wealth and culture, of high civilization. And this was a complete surprise, because the general idea was that if Abraham existed, if he did exist, well, it was only a legend, or he was a Stone Age man, a nomad, living in mud huts. However, when the residential area was unearthed, they found the houses had been 2-storied with from 10 to 22 rooms, with a paved court in the centre with inlaid furniture, a library, servants' quarters, and even an excellent sewerage system. You can still see the sewerage pipes in the British Museum today. And when they excavated the city's civic centre, they found it very well appointed. It had a legal system of justice. They found the remains of the courthouse and records of court proceedings. They found the schoolhouse, and the evidence was that they taught the 3 R's plus languages, geography, and natural science. They even found geometrical problems on tablets, also dictionaries. And they found also the site even of the public library. This was 4,000 years back, indicating the arts were diligently studied. And let me say, friends, this is recognized as the earliest civilization yet discovered, the earliest civilization of man. They also found business documents written on clay tablets and baked. Some of them reveal elaborately ruled ledgers with balanced accounts. And on 3 different tablets they even found the name of Abram. They also found his name in the library. And on one of the walls of the old houses they found scrawled in a schoolboy's hand the name Abraham, revealing that that name was a common one in use at the time the patriarch lived. So, my friends, Abram was not a legend. The old book of Genesis is trustworthy, and this is the verdict of the scholars. Sir Leonard Woolley declared, "We must revise considerably our ideas of the Hebrew patriarch when we learn that his earlier years were spent in such sophisticated surroundings." When they excavated the ruins of the palace, the size of it was remarkable. And at the end of the palace ruins, they found the gruesome death pits where was untouched the royal tomb of Queen Shubad 4,000 years ago. Going down a sloping tunnel, you can see the tomb today. They found her buried in her royal robes with a mass of crown jewels and scores of high-class vessels and precious stones. So Lady Woolley restored the head of the Queen, and it reveals great refinement and sophistication. The painted pottery they discovered was also astonishingly good. Some jars were of eggshell thinness, and the earliest articles they found were superior in art to the later ones, which was also a surprise, because the general view has been, and still is, that the further back we go, the more uncivilized man was. But they have found that this is the opposite as far as Ur of the Chaldees was concerned. They found a gold dagger, a 14-inch sheath of gold. They found a toilet case and in it were tweezers, a stiletto, and an ear scoop, all made of gold. They found a frieze of bulls from the temple ruins, made of mother of pearl. They found gold vessels of delicate workmanship, 4,000 years old, and these were common for the period. And these were very beautiful items. Then there was the royal harp found beside the court musician, and at the end of the sound box was a gold head of a bull of exquisite workmanship. And then there was the chariot mascot and rein ring from the Queen's chariot. The donkey was made of electrum, an alloy of gold and silver, a solid casting. And this was a startling revelation because it indicated these people way back there knew how to forge metals. They found a spearhead of electrum. Then they came across iron cylinders. And this was an added shock because it was reckoned that ancient man didn't learn the use of iron until millenniums later. But this showed that the earliest man was very familiar with it. What amazing evidence this was of culture, refinement, and intelligence as far as early man was concerned. And of course all this confirms the old book. There was the gold helmet also, a single sheet of 15-carat gold built in the form of a wig, and inside it they found the remains of a quilted cap. There were precious stones in the forms of necklaces and things like that. And so there it is. Now, of course, the book of Genesis tells us that the Lord called Abram out of Ur of the Chaldees to Canaan in order to preserve the knowledge of the true God. And the excavations give us an idea as to why this was, because it indicates that the religion of Ur of the Chaldees, this moon worship, which was a part of sun worship, was morally corrupt. They practiced human sacrifice. And this was the sinister discovery of Queen Shubad's tomb. They found buried by her court ladies, her harpists, her soldiers, and even her own husband. And their death had been caused by a drug. It was planned human sacrifice. And so, my friends, like Abraham, we also leave Ur of the Chaldees, and we pass along the great river Euphrates, that old river. The heat is about 130 degrees, and here we see a water wheel pulled by a horse, the same as they did thousands of years back. We come now to the city of Hilla, crowded, dirty, and hot. They told me the greatest complaint of the people here was TB of the stomach, and I could quite understand it because the food stuff and the lack of hygiene was appalling. Well, just out from Hilla are some great mounds. This was the site of ancient Babylon, that vast and glorious metropolis of ancient times that ancient historians had written about. But the scholars reckon that ancient wonders like that were impossible. Why, they said, the Ishtar Gate, the hanging gardens of Semiramis, and the mighty walls of Babylon, ancient men had no idea of how to erect such things and have such culture and learning and wealth as the ancients wrote. And when, of course, the Bible spoke of Babylon as the golden city, they ridiculed that. Well, 70 years ago, the German Oriental Society sent Dr. Coldaway with a team of archaeologists to dig out the city. It was covered with a thick layer of clay. The objects can now be seen in some of the world's museums, particularly Eastern Berlin. And when they excavated the outer mounds, they found three great walls, up to 25 feet wide, with gigantic watchtowers every 160 feet. Ample room for a roadway on top for two chariots with 4 horses leading them to pass, just as the ancients had reckoned. And when they unearthed the citadel, they found it was the largest ever known, a complex of palaces several miles in circumference. And the summer palace of Nebuchadnezzar they found to be 2 miles in circumference. This Nebuchadnezzar is a name that's mentioned prominently in the Old Testament. Now, the old book of Genesis had mentioned way back in the 10th chapter that the founder of Babylon was a man called Nimrod, the world's first king and conqueror. But the account was never acceptable to the scholars. However, when they unearthed the graven head of Nimrod in Babylon, it proved once again that the old Bible was right. Now, in Genesis chapter 11, it tells us that when they built Babylon, they built not only a city, but they also built a great tower, the Tower of Babel. And Dr. Coldaway dug out the actual site of the Tower of Babel. And a mile away he found a huge heap of rubble put there by Alexander the Great when he tried to rebuild the great tower. So here we have more confirmation of the book of Genesis in the Old Bible. And when they examined the cement, the black cement binding the bricks together, they found that it was bitumen, just as the Bible had declared in Genesis chapter 11, where it says they had bitumen, they had slime, or bitumen, Revised Version says, for mortar. And you know, when the oil men of the West, a few years ago, or many years ago, read this text concerning bitumen, they said, if that's true, there's bitumen there must be petroleum. So over they went. And of course everyone knows today that Iraq, the area of old Babylon over there, it's one of the richest oil-bearing areas in the world. Thus, you see, confirming the writings of Moses in the book of Genesis. Now, one of the 7 wonders of antiquity, remember, were the hanging gardens of Semiramis. And Coldaway found the site of the hanging gardens. And they dug out a draw well with a triple shaft that was used, they believed, with a chain pump to lift water to the gardens, giving it a continuous supply of water. How remarkable this was. These gardens, you know, that were famous for thousands of years, were built by Nebuchadnezzar to try and cure the homesickness of his wife, remember, who came from hill country. She used to grow tired of the plains, the weary, dreary plains of Babylon. Now, they also unearthed a great avenue or processional way that ran right across the city. It was the greatest ever known. And on the side were high walls. On them were lions of blue enamel brick. And this ran right over the city. And you know, when I walked down this great processional way, I thought to myself, well, maybe Daniel the prophet, the prime minister of Babylon, the Jewish prince, undoubtedly he walked down this very way also. The processional way started at the Ishtar Gate. And when this was unearthed, they found it was the most impressive thing in Babylon. It was 40 feet high, adorned with hundreds of lions and other animals. And originally in a niche in the gate was the naked statue of Ishtar, the voluptuous but beautiful queen of Babylon, the wife of Nimrod the founder. These rulers led their subjects to worship them, and on their death the claim was made that Nimrod ascended to the sun and Ishtar to the moon. And here, my friends, is the origin of sun worship, the worship of the heavenly bodies, of astrology, of fertility worship, etc. And this was the origin of the god-kings of antiquity. Later rulers were representatives of Nimrod, and as such were worshipped. And this is the origin of the god-kings of the ancient world. Now, of course, the great religious processions of the sun god went from the Ishtar gate right across the city to the Tower of Babel. And when they took place, the whole city turned out. Babylon was a great city. And of course, this is what the record is in Daniel chapter 4, verse 30. For there Daniel records the boast of Nebuchadnezzar, because remember, he restored the city of Babylon. And he said, "Is not this great Babylon I have built for the honor of my majesty," etc. Now, this statement, of course, was greatly attacked by the critics. Here, they reckon, was evidence again of the mythical nature of the Bible. There was no such thing as a great city, or Babylon was never a great city. But when they unearthed Babylon, they found thousands of bricks. And on the bricks was inscribed the name of Nebuchadnezzar, indicating that he was the builder or the rebuilder of that great and ancient city. The 7th chapter of Daniel mentions Babylon as the lion of the nations. And the one beast that they discovered there, or the one statue of the beast, amid the ruins, was the lion. Also, the book of Isaiah mentions that a Babylonian king called Merodach-Baladan sent presents to the Jewish king Hezekiah. But there was no Belshazzar in history. And so the critics attacked the record again. However, they found a tablet in Babylon recording the fact that a king called Merodach-Baladan had made a grant of land to one of his subjects, and the time agrees with the Bible record concerning Hezekiah, thus confirming the old book. Also, the 1st chapter of Daniel tells how the Babylonian kings educated the best of their captives to serve the empire. This again was greatly ridiculed. But on the ruins of one building they have found evidence to indicate it was a place of learning for captives and others who were trained for the service of the empire, thus confirming the 1st chapter of Daniel. Again in Daniel 3 it mentions 3 Hebrew worthies who were cast into a burning fiery furnace for refusing to worship the false gods of Babylon. This was ridiculed again. But they unearthed a cuneiform tablet revealing that criminals were condemned to death in Babylon by being cast into a fiery furnace, thus confirming the 3rd chapter of the book of Daniel. Now, Daniel 5, chapter 5, tells that the last king of Babylon was a man called Nebuchadnezzar, or rather Belshazzar, who drank wine to 1,000 of his lords, while the Persian armies besieged the city without. But there was no Belshazzar mentioned in history. And so the scoffers scoffed, "Where's Belshazzar?" But the Christian had no answer. However, today, if you go to the British Museum, you can see these tablets, 2 of them, or rather 6 of them altogether. And on them is the name of Belshazzar, indicating that he was a co-ruler of Babylon with his father, the last king of Babylon. Now, of course, the feast of Belshazzar has also been greatly ridiculed because they reckon that there was no hall big enough in ancient times to seat 1,000 guests. But Dr. Calderway discovered the actual throne room of the kings of Babylon, and its size was 56 feet wide by 168 feet long, ample room for 1,000 guests. Again, the book of Daniel records Daniel being thrust among the lions for refusing to cease praying to his God. And as you probably know, this great ridicule has been heaped upon this story. Well, when the excavator Guildboys was excavating in Babylon, he fell into a pit. He thought it was a well and dug it out, but instead he found it was a pit for wild animals. Again, further evidence of the truth of Daniel. My friends, the book of Daniel, that has been under attack for so long, now can be taken as true and accurate and reliable. It has been delivered, not from the den of lions, but from the den of liars. I would like you now to notice with me some of the remarkable predictions that were made of Babylon when she was in the heyday of her power. She was situated, remember, on the great Euphrates River, and her fertile lands were irrigated by canals. The prophet Jeremiah declared in chapter 50, verse 38, a drought is upon her waters, and they shall be dried up, for it's the land of graven images, and they are mad upon their idols. Now what a prediction to make of this great city. Well, it first began to be fulfilled when the Persian armies diverted the river from its course in order to get under the walls into the city. Today, the piers of Babylon's famous bridges stand in dry ground. The area all around is a wilderness, dry, despite the fertility of the soil. Her waters are literally dried up. Again, the prophet Isaiah, in his 13th chapter and verse 19, declared, when Babylon was in the heyday of her power, Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, and she surely was. The beauty of the Chaldees' excellency shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation. Neither shall the Arabian pitch tent there, neither shall the shepherds make their fold there, but the wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, and so on. Now what a prediction. Astounding prediction. Never be inhabited. The Arabian wouldn't pitch tent there, and the shepherds wouldn't make their fold there. You know, 100 years after the prophecy was written, Babylon reached the peak of her power. She had stood for almost 2,000 years as the world's leading city. At the time of Christ, there was a population still of 600,000 people. It looked as if the prophet was wrong. But since then, Babylon has been uninhabited exactly as the prediction was written. And the Arab would not pitch tent there. This refers to the Bedouin. And you know, today it's 2,600 years since Isaiah wrote that prediction. The Bedouin refuses to camp in Babylon. Why? He believes it's haunted. How did Isaiah know that 2,700 years ago? You know, through the years, travellers who have gone to Babylon, knowing the prediction, have tried to bribe the Bedouin to camp with them in the ruins overnight, but never have they succeeded. Now, not only that, we find that Jeremiah, in his 51st chapter of his great book, also made this chapter in verse 37, and Babylon shall become heaps, a dwelling place for dragons or jackals, an astonishment and a hissing without an inhabitant. Babylon shall become heaps. What a fantastic prediction to make of the world's leading city. But today one sees how true this prediction is. As you approach Babylon, there you see the huge mounds in the distance. The excavator has heaped up piles of rubble in uncovering the ancient ruins. It will be a dwelling place for jackals. When I first visited there, I said to the guide, "Are there any jackals around Babylon?" "Oh, yes," he said. "In the early morning you can see them slinking among the ruins." I thought that was wonderful. After 2,700 years. What confidence this gives the Christian. You know, down through the Christian era, Christians have taken this old book and by faith accepted it as the Word of God. And how justified they were. And you know, the prophet said, Babylon shall become an astonishment. And it is an astonishment. Its soil is the most fertile in the world. It used to yield a crop, an average of 200-fold. The wheat heads were 4 fingers breadth. Yet no one has lived there for centuries of time. The prophet Jeremiah wrote, "Open her storehouses, Cast her up as heaps, destroy her utterly. A sword is upon her treasures, and they shall be robbed. And you know, friends, Babylon was famous for her treasures. Not without meaning was she called the Golden City. Some of her buildings were covered with gold. And for centuries after her fall, conquerors marched to Babylon for plunder to pay their armies. Historians reckon that there was more gold found than could meet their wildest dreams. Persians, Greeks, Romans, even the wildest of tribes dug out the treasure. And the plunderers, searching for the treasure, made the city a vast wreck and left it a mass of rubble. Jeremiah said, all that spoiled her shall be satisfied. And so it was. And you know, friends, still today, Babylon has her treasures, but treasures of a different kind. There are treasures of faith and knowledge there. For as one gazes upon the sight, he realizes how remarkably true are the predictions of the old book and are the historical statements of the Old Testament of the Bible. Continuing north from Babylon, we come to Baghdad, and then further north several hundred miles we reach the city of Mosul. And what is here that's of interest to us? Well, of course, we have been travelling up the Tigris River, that ancient river mentioned thousands of years back in the Bible, which reminds us of the ancient peoples that lived there in the dim and distant past. We see women by the riverside in the early morning with their water pots, gossiping. And you know, they've got the same kind of water pots as they used thousands of years back. Across from Mosul, over the river, the Tigris River, are some great mounds. The first mound we see is one called Jonah's tomb, but it's not Jonah's tomb. Under that is a part of a great city, the capital of the great Assyrian Empire. For thousands of years, as you know, Nineveh was lost. Its location was unknown, and doubts existed whether it actually existed. And many times Christians were attacked. Where is Nineveh? And the Christian had no answer. However, in 1842, the French consul, curious, began to poke around these ruins. He came across various objects, and the discovery rocked the world. It was Nineveh, the ancient capital of Assyria. Today, a road runs right over the top of the site. The city is many feet below. So much soil covers it that the excavators dug tunnels underneath and along the side of the walls. The fabulous finds were hauled out to the daylight, and many of them can be seen in the museums of the world. The book of Genesis recorded in the 10th chapter that the builder of Nineveh was Nimrod again. And one of the objects they found as they began to excavate was a huge head, stone head. The natives ran off in fright, declaring it a god. And on examination it was found to be the head of Nimrod, who was worshipped as a god way back in the early years. Now, another mound there, when they excavated that, they found that it was the famous palace of Sennacherib, one of the great kings of Assyria, a name very prominent in the Old Testament. And inside they found 71 halls and chambers, mostly panelled with costly alabaster. Others were adorned with beautiful coloured bricks. They found in one room 120 tons of iron implements, and they're as good as any that were in use in the area today. Yet 2,700 years old they were. They also found the king's throne carved out of beautiful stone weighing 30 tons. The city of Nineveh altogether had 27 portals. They were flanked by colossal winged bulls or lion sphinxes. What a city it must have been. Many of these things, of course, now adorn the museums of the Northern Hemisphere. But one of the gates, the Nergal Gate, has been restored. And these gates, of course, were these great animals, covered with glazed tiles, very impressive. They also found many tablets, of course, that told of the history of Nineveh and other items revealing the high standard of art. In one mound where they were digging, the spade of an excavator fell through and they heard it land way down below. they lowered the workmen in, and they found a huge hall. And this was the palace, one of the palaces. And they made one of the greatest discoveries of all time as far as archaeology is concerned. It was a huge library of King Ashurbanipal containing 25,000 volumes on clay tablets of religious, scientific and literary works. Of exceptional interest was the account, or a tablet giving an account of a flood, of a universal flood. And in its details it agrees substantially with the flood account of the book of Genesis. In fact, it's interesting to notice that when these many tablets were taken to the British Museum and they began to decipher them, they found this broken tablet of the flood, but half of it was missing. So they sent over to try and find the other half. And the first thing they found in the mound was the remaining half of the flood tablet. And of course it confirms the story of Noah and the ark in the book of Genesis. And not only that, they found on the walls of many of the palaces, carved in bas relief, the scenes of the lives of the Assyrian kings. There's nearly 2 miles of wall of bas relief. You can see today some of this, and also in the museums of the world. There's one, for instance, there's one relief there depicting or telling the story of how Sennacherib was murdered by his sons. This also, of course, is mentioned in the Old Testament, but was scoffed at and reckoned to be unhistoric. But of course, this proved the book was right. There's another there showing Tiglath-Pileser in his chariot of state. He also is mentioned in 2 Kings 16, which was also reckoned unhistorical until they discovered this in Nineveh. Then there's another scene depicting the siege of Lachish, a Jewish city. This was also unacceptable to the critics. But here again was a remarkable demonstration of the accuracy of the Old Testament Old Testament history. Then there was another confirmation, the tablet of Jehu, where it shows that Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, receiving the submission of Jehu, proving again the Bible records. Then there's the cylinder of Sennacherib, telling of the exploits, his exploits against Hezekiah, king of Judah, and confirming again another historic story. Now, not only do these things prove the Bible right, but friends, when we look at the predictions made by the ancient prophets concerning Nineveh and Assyria, here again is great evidence telling us that the Bible is indeed the Word of God and must have been inspired by more than men. When Nineveh was at the peak of her power, the prophet Nahum wrote, "Woe to the city of blood! It is full of lies and robbery. Behold, I am against thee, saith the Lord. I will show nations thy nakedness and shame." The Assyrians were a very cruel people, and finally the surrounding nations revolted, and during a great flood of the Tigris they battered down the city gates. The prophet had written, "The gates of the river shall be opened, and the palace shall be dissolved." The last king shut himself with his family in his palace and set it alight. And Nahum tells us in chapter 2, 9 and 10, "Take you the spoil of silver, take the spoil of gold, for there's no end of the store and glory of all the pleasant furniture. She is empty and void and waste." What a prediction to make. No end of the store, empty, void and waste. You know, the prophecy seems absurd. But the conquering nations, they sacked the city, they took away all they could carry. But thousands of years later, when the archaeologists began to dig in, they found thousands of beautiful objects in the palace chambers. There literally seemed to be no end of the store, as the prophet had said. And today, while Nineveh is empty, void and waste, it's quite fantastic what they've taken from underneath those sands. And in Nahum, in chapter 3, verse 6, makes this prediction: "I will cast abominable filth upon thee, and make thee vile, and will set thee as a gazing stock." And you know, my friends, how true this has been fulfilled. The Tigris River in a flood heaped silt upon the city, and finally the desert sands covered it. And you know, today Nineveh literally is a gazing stock. As I gazed upon it in wonder, I suddenly realized that I too was fulfilling the prediction. And not only that, we find that in the book of Zephaniah, the 2nd chapter, this prophet also made this remarkable prediction concerning this great city. In verse 13, he will stretch out his hand against the north and destroy Assyria, and will make Nineveh a desolation and dry like a wilderness. And flocks shall lie down in the midst of her. Notice that? Of Babylon, it said, it would not be a dwelling place for flocks, you see. But of Nineveh, flocks would lie down in the midst of her. And today, my friends, if you go over to old Nineveh, there you see in the very site, in the very centre, flocks being grazed by Bedouin shepherds. And it's been like this for centuries of time. How wonderful it all is. These prophecies have been fulfilled exactly to the very letter, indicating that the writers of the old book were inspired by God. Now Nahum also said, remember, I will make thy grave, for thou art fire, and thou shalt be hid. 200 years after Nineveh fell, a Greek army passed the ruins, and they didn't know whose ruins they were. Later they were covered by the sand and hidden, and in that vast grave were preserved the fabulous treasures of art and knowledge. We believe that this burial of Nineveh was very, very significant. For these days when the Bible has been under attack as never before, it seems that the Lord has led men to heave away the sand of ages, to reveal these things that prove the old book after all is right. And so, my friends, to the critics who used to say, where's Nineveh, or where's Belshazzar, or where is Chaldees, the Chaldees, at the most vital moment, and in a startling manner, the earth will open up their book and say, here is Damascus, here is Nineveh, here is the Chaldees. And so we can accept the old book for all it comes to be, the word of the living God, and that holy men wrote it, they were inspired by the Holy Spirit. My friends, may we accept it if it really claims to be what it claims to be. The Word of God, a guide book for mankind. The book that tells us where we came from, why we're here, and where we're going, and how to get there. The book that gives us peace. The book that's the answer to the problems of this life. The book, my friends, that shows us how to live life eternal. And God help us to accept it and to believe it. It's my sincere prayer.